Hopefully you find this just as interesting as I do. Okay, one of the challenges we have in finishing up guitars is people are, different kinds of people are going to play them using different techniques, different picks, different approaches to the string, and they're all going to move the string differently. One of the things that people come up against is localized buzzing. Where the string moves the most, it tends to rattle on the top of the fret, and it's frustrating. The way that that's been solved historically is to put frets in a board, level the tops of them so you don't buzz at one that's high, and then put a relief or a curvature in the neck through an adjustable truss rod. And technically, this would allow the string to move the most in the center and the least at the edges. The problem is the string doesn't move like that at all. The Plek and what we do with it is a result of actually watching the string move. Watching a string movement under strobe light is like putting it into slow motion. You can actually see the shape of the string. It's not what you'd expect. It doesn't move the most in the middle. In fact, when you pluck the string with your right hand, it sends a bundle of energy up towards the nut. And that bundle of energy is moving the most as it approaches the end of the fingerboard, not the center. So right above the sound hole to the body of the guitar, where the neck joins the body, is the most movement, and this is the place where you need the most room between the string and the top of the fret. Then beyond that, the shape changes, and it'll actually echo what you're doing with your right hand up at the other end of the string. So it almost looks like what you don't want to see when you look down your neck, which is like a ski slope. A curvature from the nut to the 14th fret, going up to a hump and dropping down again. That's exactly what you need, but the measurements of that are so small that the neck can look straight, although you have that in it. The solution to this for us is way before the Plek. I was introduced to this concept by Steve Klein. Steve Klein worked with the other Northern California geniuses like Alembic. They did what they called a rock and roll fret job, where you're trying to get the strings as low as possible without any buzzing. And they did this process, and it was done by hand. Knowing how to do that, that's what we've done with Santa Cruz guitars for a couple of decades, is to try to duplicate this shape by hand planing and sanding. So now I explained the shape from the nut to the end of the fingerboard at the sound hole. There's also another bit of geometry here, which is as you move from a heavy gauge string to a lighter gauge string, this thing should actually change to accommodate the different movement of each string. There's one more piece of geometry here, which is the radius of the fingerboard. It's meant to reflect the shape of your finger when you press it down for a bar chord. And on a lot of guitars, that radius remains constant from the nut to the body joint, or actually the end of the fretboard. However, what happens is we widen the strings as they approach the bridge to broaden the space between for your right hand for facility, for finger picking, whatever. You need more room there. And as these strings widen out down the fretboard, they get further and further away from the fretboard, making them harder to play, and the note becomes sharper as the string travels the distance to rest on the fingerboard. Now at this point, there's another bit of geometry that's really important, which is the difference in diameter from the bass to the treble strings, and the fingerboard curvature has to be adapted for the movement of each of those strings. Unless someone should consider that this is a mechanical operation that doesn't give us control for personal playing styles, we adapt this also for playing style, how hard you play, and the action that you desire. So I've described a really nice little bit of topography that the fretboard should look like when it's done. And this it can be done by hand, but the problem for us is to do this took the better part of a year in experience and training for somebody to get good enough to be very intuitive about this and accommodate individual players' styles. The next problem is you got about that much time, maybe a little longer, to do this process every day before you develop carpal tunnel syndrome. Really, the ability to ruin your career by hurting yourself. That's not only unethical, but it's bad business. It's really, really costly. The Plek machine comes in at this point, What we needed is a way to do exactly what we wanted as luthiers, but eliminate the stress that comes from the handwork of it. So the Plek machine has been, oh man, it's been in development for, I'm sure, 15 years plus. When it first was developed, it was a way for a concave grinder to crown the top of the frets and put them in the proper position. There's a problem here. You can get the tops of the frets in exactly the right geometry to do what I was saying, but when you do that on a board that's doesn't have the same shape, you end up with the frets extending different levels, different distances from the fretboard. So imagine this: if you took a lumpy fretboard and then put the frets in and ground them flat, you're going to have different heights of frets. When you press the string down, it first contacts the fret and then it travels to the board, and if these distances are different, it will change the intonation and it will give discrepancies in tone in different places you play on the fingerboard. These are subtleties, but you'll hear it. When that's done properly, the guitar plays well in tune, it sounds much better, the tone's consistent, and you get a level of sophistication that you haven't found in guitars before. This is a cool thing. We not only keep people from injury, but we improve the sound of the instrument. When we do this, that's great service for everybody all around. In that sense, the luthier determines what this guitar needs as far as shaping of the fretboard. The guitar initially goes into the machine, and the fretboard surface is scanned under string tension. It gets the shape of the board, and that scan shows up on a monitor. The luthier looks at this shape and then puts his preferred template on top of that and registers it. So then the machine now cuts what the luthier wants to see, and it does this automatically and nobody gets hurt. Pretty cool stuff, eh? The first process that we'll do with the guitar is to put it under string tension. So this means strings are applied to the guitar with no frets in it. It's put in the cradle of the Plek machine. The Plek scans this fingerboard surface under string tension, and it registers what it looks like. Then the strings are removed, and it scans it again, and it shows what it looks like in the absence of string tension. So now the intelligence of the machine knows where that is, no matter if you have strings on it or not. So the next process, we remove the strings to get them out of the way of the cutter, and the luthier sees the scan of the fingerboard shape. He lays his template over that and then presses the command for the machine to cut what he desires. There's a little tiny 2.5 millimeter cutter that's actually a ball end, so the surface that it cuts is really, really small, and it goes in an ever-increasing circle until it's milled the whole fretboard in what we want to see. At this point, the guitar comes out of the machine, and these milling marks from the cutter, although very small, are sanded out and removed. The fretboard is polished. At this point, the frets can go in conventionally. We hammer them in, and then the guitar goes back in the machine under simulated string tension, so that the Plek again can scan the surface and see where things are under string tension. It can scan again without tension, just like before, so it knows the differential. At this point, it's also plucked each string in each playing position and measured the distance from the string, bottom of the string, to the top of the fret. Now, with all this geometry, it's very cool what can happen. The Plek can then go with it's a rotary cutter with a few hundred little concave teeth that knows what the original geometry that we ask it to cut the fretboard. It's going to do that across the top of each fret, and it's going to take within 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch. I can't even tell you what fraction of a hair that is. That's rocket ship tolerances. When we're done, we have perfect geometry on the neck. We also have all the geometry of where the saddle top should be and how deep the nut slot should be. At this point, we change the cutter to a little tiny bit that's under 10,000ths of an inch that can cut the slots in the nut super accurately, and really soon we'll have the ability to also measure the depth that they cut. So again, there's no variation in where those slots are. It'll set those in the right place. Now it also knows where the top of the saddle should be, so we can take the saddle out of the bridge, put it in a separate fixture upside down, and the machine will shave off the bottom of the saddle the amount to give the appropriate saddle height when we're done. All these things are double checked once the guitar is out of the machine, but we have our tolerances at that point, and we know what they're like under string tension, and there's no reason to argue about this. We've nailed it. In our style of building, there's a lot of individual judgment, there's a lot of artistry, there's a lot of stuff that takes an immense amount of training, skill, practice to do. And by automating these processes that don't require judgment or artistry, we give our artisans more time to do the cool stuff and less drudgery. There's another part of repetitive motion that we don't always think about. Not only can it ruin your career by wrecking your wrist and your elbow and your shoulder and your back, your brain will shrink if you do the same thing over and over again without any purpose.